Shamrock Sports. I'm Johnny Soper alongside Austin Rooney and John Horlander. Fellas, what did we learn this weekend?
Notre Dame needs to play better if they're looking to get a win over Vanderbilt this week.
The offensive line needs some improvement.
Sunshine. He's on a heater. He hands off, and it's another touchdown. It's Jafar Armstrong. Turnover. And Wimbush gives it up the middle. Tony Jones Jr. breaking tackle to the end zone. Touchdown Notre Dame. The back Huntley next to the quarterback. Fires, it's intercepted over the deflection. Jalen Elliott from his safety position.
Welcome to Shamrock Sports, everyone. Austin Rooney, John Horlander, Johnny Soper previewing the Vanderbilt game, reviewing the Ball State game, and that's a good place to start because, Rooney, we have to give you some respect.
You earned it, man.
Last week on this show, Austin Rooney made the prediction that it would be a close game against Ball State. Horlander and I excoriated him for his terrible opinion.
I think at one point I laughed in his face saying that he was crazy if he thought that this game would be even remotely within 20 points. And
look
it
what
stayed
happened.
that way the whole game. So
24-16. Congratulations, my friend. And we're
well,
sorry.
thank you. And apology, somewhat accepted. We'll move on from there later. But what I'd first like to say is that we talked about Riley Neal on the show last week, and we said Riley Neal, he had a good game versus Central Connecticut State the week before, and he had a very, very good game versus Notre Dame last week. 23 for 50, doesn't look great on the surface. He had a touchdown, and he was able to throw the ball away when he was pressured. They'd have to roll him out to the right, and when he was rolled out, he got away from the defensive line from Notre Dame and threw the ball away consistently, and that prevented a lot of big losses that he could have suffered.
And I think that's a commendation more on the Notre Dame defense, perhaps, than the Ball State offense, is that they were getting after him all night or all day. And 23 for 50, 180 yards, 2 picks, 1 touchdown. It's an okay stat line. I mean, I think you looked at in a vacuum. Riley Neal didn't perhaps have a great game, and the Notre Dame defense did a great job of shutting him down. I think the reason that his game stands out and the reason that this game seems so much of an anomaly is because of the offensive play of Notre Dame.
That's right, and I think that we didn't mention this all that much last week. I didn't expect this to be a big thing in the Ball State game, and that was Ball State's defense. I thought Ball State's defense was very good, and Notre Dame's offense was not very good. Part of my prediction last week was that Notre Dame was going to win this game by scoring quite a few points. I thought they'd put up maybe 40, 42 points, and Ball State would put up a little over 20, and that's how the game would go. It would be more of a shootout than a defensive matchup, but it was really that defensive game. Notre Dame really never got the offense going, and Ball State's defense was quite good.
Yeah, Ball State actually outgained Notre Dame last week. They had 414 yards to Notre Dame's 349. So the offensive struggles were a bit surprising, as you mentioned, and Brandon Wimbush had a career high in passing yards, but he also had a career high in interceptions, and he had 3 interceptions against a defense really that nobody expected to be that good, and probably one of the lesser defenses that Notre Dame will face this season. So that was a bit concerning.
Yeah, I think it was very concerning, honestly. Again, I thought that Ball State was going to be a pretty good team coming in, but I still think Ball State is probably the worst team on Notre Dame's schedule talent-wise. So for Notre Dame to only put up, fewer than 350 yards, that's not impressive. And this is coming off of a game that Ball State allowed more than 250 yards to Central Connecticut State. So if Notre Dame can only put up more than 100 yards more than Central Connecticut State, well, that's a pretty big problem they've got moving forward. I don't think this is going to be huge for them. I think that they're going to recover from this game. But then again, it was not an encouraging game versus Ball State this past week.
It wasn't, and I think that it truly does boil down almost exclusively to the offensive line. I think you can point out the mistakes that Wimbush made individually, some throws that were erratic. 2 of those interceptions looked really bad. One of them was tipped at the line. But I think you look at 117 rushing yards from the Irish, a team that is a very run-dominant team. Brandon Wimbush, only 3 designed quarterback runs, and a quarterback that pretty much almost certainly favors the run.
Absolutely.
The run game as a whole was lacking because of the way that the offensive line played. They weren't creating holes. The defensive line, the front 7, was getting way too much pressure on the Notre Dame backs, and I really think that if they want to not repeat this performance, if they want to come out and beat a team that they're supposed to beat the way that they're supposed to beat them, the offensive line has got to protect Wimbush and the running backs a lot better.
Yeah, so Brian Kelly said that he's not going to push the red alert button on the offensive line just yet. He said he's been around the game long enough to know when he needs to do that, and he's not concerned. But these numbers are pretty staggering. Notre Dame 120th in the country in rushing offense. That's 2.83 yards per rush, and 124 yards a game is what they're averaging. Compare that to last year, where they finished 3rd in the country in yards per carry and 7th in the country in yards per game. Now, we all know we lost 2 great offensive linemen, 2 top 15 picks in the NFL, who are incredible talents, and they won the Joe Moore Award last year for best offensive line in college football. So hard to replace that. We get that. But I don't think we expected it to be this bad, especially against Ball State.
It might be the coldest take in Shamrock sports history.
Oh boy, here we go.
Mike McGlinchey and Quentin Nelson were a big part of Notre Dame's success last year.
I think that I would say is a pretty cold take.
Now you've got Harry Highstand left for the Bears,
Right.
and Jeff Quinn's the new offensive line coordinator. A lot of new moving parts in that Notre Dame offensive line, and I think that there was an expectation that they would perform at the same level, and I think that expectation was unfair. And so I think that Notre Dame needs to refocus their mentality and get ready to bear the brunt of a Vanderbilt defense that's going to be ready to get after the Notre Dame offense.
Unfair, I agree, but this bad?
Well, you see, I don't think the offensive line.
I mean, Brandon Wimbush is the leading rusher right now.
It's true, but don't get me wrong. There's still
30 carries for Wimbush.
3 of the 5 offensive linemen are returning. You still have guys like Alex Bars, Sam Mustapher, Tommy Kramer returning to this offensive line. So it's not a completely inexperienced group.
And that's how it's always been at Notre Dame. I mean, they spend 2 years learning, and then they fill in that starting role.
Exactly.
Right?
So I was actually pretty surprised the offensive line took this big of a step back, because there is experience there, and someone like Alex Bars, a lot of people thought he could be All-American quality. So there are guys on this offensive line who are very good. So I would not push that red alert button either just yet. I think it might take another week or 2 for them to really go into this role and become those big guys on the offensive line.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to agree with both of you. I'm not going to push the red alert button yet. I think that there were some glaring, mistakes and errors that were made against Ball State, but it could be attributed to one of 2 things. Maybe Ball State was just a better team than people expected. I know that that's the camp that you're in, Rooney. I think that Ball State was maybe just a better team than we were expecting, or Notre Dame realized that they could put the cruise control on and not play very aggressively and eke out a win. Who cares if they didn't cover the spread? Who cares if it wasn't pretty? At the end of the day, Notre Dame's 2-0.
Yeah.
That loss column is still a 0. They're still 8th in the country, and so even though it was ugly, I don't think that I'd like to see how they come out against Vanderbilt. Are they going to come out with a renewed mentality, a new aggressive Notre Dame offense that's going to put the beat down on them, or are they going to struggle again?
Well, John,
a win is a win is a win is a win is a win.
I think you're both exactly right. I think that there was a little bit of cruise control, and it was a little bit of Ball State was better than people thought.
Well, they played with an edge, which is every team who plays here, especially a MAC team or a lesser opponent, comes here and they play with an edge. And you're right, Notre Dame overlooked them, and they spent the entire week talking about how they need to prepare better, how they need to focus better, all this. Now, when I hear this, my honest reaction is, are you serious? Are you serious?
It's true.
You need to prepare better, you need to focus better? How is it that difficult? You're playing football at Notre Dame. How is it difficult to focus on competing no matter who you're playing? Why does the opponent have to matter for them to get up for a game?
Yes, but I think that if you look at Notre Dame's schedule and the way it's set up, the amount of hype and energy that was surrounding that Michigan game, and this big, it was a 7-point win, and Notre Dame had, bested Michigan, and a lot of energy was expended doing that. And it's very tough to get that excited for Michigan and then turn around and get that excited to play Ball State.
I don't disagree.
And I think that if you look at Notre Dame's schedule down the line, I can foresee that coming up in the future with home game against Stanford, away to Virginia Tech, 2 probable top 15 matchups, and then you got to come back home and play Pitt. I can foresee a game like that being how you're going to get excited to play Pitt after you've just played these 2 top 15 games. Later in the season.
And Pitt's playing well, though. I mean, Pitt played Penn State well last week. So you're right. That's a big trap game that I think everyone is circling. Northwestern, another trap game. But it was just a lackluster performance, and you could feel in the stadium that the energy wasn't there. No. The energy just wasn't there. Now, one thing that concerns me is Brandon Wimbush. He has 1 touchdown pass this season. That was to Chris Fink against Michigan, to 4 interceptions. 3 interceptions against Ball State. One of them was a tipped ball, probably not his fault. But the decision making, he took 4 sacks against Ball State. He was running around in the backfield. He was running backwards 15 yards. It made no sense.
It was not a great game from Brandon Wimbush versus Ball State. People mentioned the high number of yards, but still, the number of interceptions is not pretty. And he didn't throw a single touchdown pass, and that's against Ball State. You think about a defense that's probably not going to kill you. That's the Ball State defense. You should be throwing 2, 3, 4 touchdown passes if you're putting up nearly 300 yards. You didn't have a single one. So that's not promising from Brandon Wimbush. I still think Notre Dame's going to stick with him, and until they really run into trouble, I don't think Brian Kelly is going to go away from Brandon Wimbush. If Notre Dame is undefeated, they're not putting any in book. Period.
I don't think they're. I wasn't suggesting that, but at some point during the season, they're going to run into a defense that can easily stop the run game, which isn't very good, and they're going to be forced to score points through the air. How are they going to do it?
I don't think that Notre Dame is in a position where when the quarterback play is struggling, that they can afford to turn to someone with very little experience like Ian Book has. Granted, he played very well in the Citrus Bowl. He started that game at North Carolina last year. He has some experience. He's not, fresh out there. But the amount of experience that Brandon Wimbush has accrued over his, nearly 4 years here at Notre Dame is just too much to ignore. And I think that you have to understand that's he is not a pocket passer. But the performances that he's put on these first 2 games are exactly the Brandon Wimbush that we kind of expected to see. A run-first quarterback, not the most adept pocket passer, but there were moments against Michigan and against Ball State where he made some very impressive throws. I just think that his decision-making was extremely subpar against Ball State because he was under so much pressure. He was constantly forced to think on his feet, and he couldn't just sit back in the pocket and comfortably fire a ball to Boykin or Claypool and make that easy pass.
Okay, but if I can push back on that for a second, that's football. Like he's gonna. You think when Stanford comes into town, that defense is gonna be better than Ball State? Of course they're gonna be better than Ball State. He's gonna be pressured against Stanford. He's gonna be pressured against Virginia Tech. This is gonna happen.
I will say, in Brandon Wimbush's defense, we are sort of overlooking that game versus Michigan right now. And if you remember that first half versus Michigan,
it was great.
We saw Brandon Wimbush and we saw flashes of what he can do. That's the question. Can he get back to that? Did he overlook the game versus Ball State like the rest of them? We just don't know the answers to those questions. But ultimately, if you can take one thing out that is at least somewhat promising right now, the completion percentage is a little bit higher. It was 49.5% last year. It's right around 55% right now. That's better for Brandon Wimbush. We'll have to see if he can keep that up and improve upon that completion percentage.
Yeah. And the receivers have been playing well. Miles Boykin actually had a career-high 119 reception yards against Ball State.
Very solid.
Averaged 21 yards per catch. So he's becoming a good target for Brandon Wimbush. One target that won't be available this weekend is tight end Cole Kmet. He's out with a high ankle sprain, so we'll probably see Alize Mack get a few more opportunities. He's been targeted a few times this season.
Nick Weisher will get up there for sure as well.
Yep. So that might be interesting to see how the offense changes without Cole Kmet.
And if I can speak to that, it's very difficult situation that Notre Dame is in now with Cole Kmet out. But his injury didn't come in the second quarter. His injury came late in the second half, in a position where some could argue that
he shouldn't have been in the game.
Notre Dame shouldn't have had Cole Kmet in the game because they should have been in better control. They shouldn't have had their tight end 1 in the game that late.
Yeah, I agree. And we'll get to defense in a minute, and we'll preview the Vanderbilt matchup. But there have only been 2 linebackers who played for Notre Dame this season, Tavon Coney and Drew Tranquill. They've played every snap. And last week was a game where you thought, okay, they maybe played for the first half and maybe part of the third quarter, and they ended up having to play every single snap on defense, 97 snaps. And when Stanford comes in 2 weeks, that might be concerning to how much they've been playing. So just something to think about. By the way, Notre Dame's opponents last week, Stanford and USC, 2 common opponents, played each other. And there are a number of matchups in college football that Notre Dame fans should take interest in. And Caroline Pineda has the recap for us.
Looking ahead at weeks 5 and 6 on the schedule, the Irish will face number 9 Stanford at home before traveling to compete in a road contest at number 13 Virginia Tech. This week, both of those teams picked up wins to improve to 2-0 on the season. Stanford faced off against another future Notre Dame opponent, shutting down number 22 USC 17-3. Bryce Love put the Cardinal on the board early with this 6-yard touchdown run, going on to rush for 136 yards in the contest. The defense made a strong statement as well, forcing 3 turnovers, including 1 strip sack. Meanwhile, Virginia Tech rolled William & Mary 62-17 1 week after beating Florida State 24-3. Florida State is another team that Notre Dame will see later on this year. This weekend, Stanford will host UC Davis, but will do so without star running back Bryce Love, who is sidelined with an undisclosed injury. Virginia Tech was supposed to play East Carolina, but that game has been canceled due to the forecast of Hurricane Florence. Elsewhere in college football, the top 4 teams have remained the same in the AP poll and the coaches poll. Those top 4 are Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, and Ohio State. 3 of those teams routed their opponents this week, but Clemson faced a scare against Texas A&M in a game that went down to the wire.
All right, Caroline Pineda with our college football recap. A lot of great games last weekend. Stanford looked really good against USC. USC looked really bad. They couldn't score at all. So Sam Darnold leaves, and all of a sudden, they have no points.
Yeah, well, freshman quarterback JT Daniels, they're asking a lot of him to step in like that. And Stanford is just such a talented group. David Shaw does such a great job there. Their offense looks dangerous. Their defense is hungry to get after it. That is going to be a big game when they come here in 2 weeks.
Huge game. Huge game. Let's talk a little bit more about the Notre Dame defense, which has been really good. If there's been one shining star and maybe diamond in the rough, at least for last week's game, it's the Notre Dame defense. Red zone efficiency for the defense has been incredible. Opposing quarterbacks, Austin, are 2 for 14 with 18 yards and 1 touchdown in the red zone this year against Notre Dame. Defense has really stepped up in a big way in the absence of points.
They have, and we mentioned how Riley Neal had a good game last week for Ball State. His completion percentage wasn't that good, and the reason it wasn't that good was that Notre Dame did a good job getting to him, and they forced him to scramble. They forced him to throw the ball away. That's why the completion percentage was low, is because they put pressure on the quarterback. And if they can do the same thing this week, they should be okay versus Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt is a more talented team than Ball State is. There's no doubt about it, but I still think if Notre Dame can put pressure on the quarterback, they'll be just fine.
And it's the most impressive stat line to me is that Ball State ran 97 offensive plays. That's a record. It's the record number of plays run by an opposing team coming into Notre Dame Stadium. And they scored 1 touchdown.
Right.
They averaged 3.6 yards per play. They didn't move the football very well. On 97 plays, they scored 16 points. Notre Dame's defense did such a good job of the bend but don't break philosophy. This Ball State team seemed to move the ball down the field. It seemed like everything was going well. They were 8 of 23 on 3rd down.
Yeah.
This Notre Dame defense got pushed to the brink and stood firm time and time again. And if Notre Dame's defense doesn't do that, then we're looking at an upset. If Ball State manages to convert a couple of touchdowns on those drives, out of 97 plays, you should be able to get more than 1 touchdown.
Right.
If that Notre Dame defense doesn't hold firm, this is a different ball game.
Yeah.
It was. They had 50 passes, 47 rushes for Ball State. So they mixed it up pretty well. There were a lot of passing plays.
They threw everything at the dartboard.
They did.
Because they had nothing to lose.
Exactly right.
Now, Vanderbilt, on the other hand, has a lot to lose, and so does Notre Dame this weekend. Both teams are 2-0. Vanderbilt looking for their second straight 3-0 start. And, Ellen Geyer has keys to the game.
All these clowns do is argue. While they mess around, I'm going to tell you what you need to know. I'm Ellen Geyer, and these are 3 keys to this week's game. One, the Irish have got to come out with better intensity. Last week, it was clear that Notre Dame didn't take their opponent seriously in Ball State. That kind of attitude won't work this week against Vanderbilt. Although the Commodores are unranked, they've had 2 25-plus point wins in the first 2 weeks of college football. If the Irish want the victory, they're going to have to come out strong and sustain their competitive intensity throughout all 4 quarters. Second, there's got to be a better connection between the quarterback and the wide receivers. Last week, the disconnect between quarterback Brandon Wimbush and wide receivers Chase Claypool and Miles Boykin was apparent. For his part, Wimbush has got to trust his receivers to get to the spot and make the catch. For their part, the receivers have to get off their lines quickly and run sharp routes, giving Wimbush the window he needs to make the throw. Additionally, the receivers have to recognize that Wimbush is ultimately a dynamic quarterback who favors the run, so they have to give him the space to rack up his own yards when the windows open up. 3, the offensive line has got to show up. Last week, the O-line failed in their blocking and allowed Ball State an unprecedented 4 sacks on Brandon Wimbush. That kind of performance is not going to fly against Vanderbilt. The Commodores have allowed their opponents a combined 17 points in the past 2 games. This means that if Notre Dame wants to win the game, they've got to have better blocking on the line so Wimbush can make the plays in critical moments in the game. I'm Ellen Geyer, and that's 3 keys to this week's game.
All right, thanks, Ellen. Well, she said it right there at the end. Vanderbilt has scored a lot of points this season. Now, they've played Middle Tennessee and Nevada, so take that with a grain of salt. But I think this is probably the best offense Notre Dame has faced thus far.
Right, and we talked about it last week. Remember what we said time and time again. Ball State has only faced Central Connecticut State.
Right.
What are they going to do against Notre Dame's defense?
Right.
And then they came out and ran 97 plays and gained almost 500 yards.
Yeah.
So I think that, who you play definitely must be taken into account, but this is a Vanderbilt offense that is definitely capable of putting up some points.
They are, and I think we've seen it with Kyle Shermer, their starting quarterback. He looked good versus both Middle Tennessee and Nevada. 10 for 17 versus Middle Tennessee. Nevada, he was 23 for 32. Put up 170 yards the first week, 270 yards that second week. And he's added a couple of touchdowns in each of those games. So he has produced. We have seen him put up big yards, especially last week versus Nevada. So don't be surprised if he's going to put up another 250 yards this week. And then watch out for the running game. The running game is a very interesting situation over at Vanderbilt because they have 4 different running backs that they'll use. They've got 4 guys who have between 12 and 20 carries in the season. No one has more than 20. None of them have fewer than 12. So they work all of them in. The names, Kashawn Vaughn you're going to look for, Jamari Wakefield, Josh Crawford, and Corey Blasingame. Those are the 4 guys you're going to look for this week, and you may see a fair bit of each and every one of them. So their running backs will be fresh.
Yeah, Kalijah Lipscomb is their leading wide receiver. He had 10 receptions last week against Nevada and 2 touchdowns. So probably going to be a big target against Notre Dame this weekend. Kyle Shermer, though, you bring up Shermer. I think Shermer is actually going to be a really good quarterback, probably an NFL talent. He's actually second all-time in Vanderbilt history in touchdown passes. He has 44 behind the inimitable Jay Cutler.
Vanderbilt legend Jay Cutler. And Kyle Shermer is in that territory as well.
Yeah.
As you said, he's second to Jay Cutler in Vanderbilt touchdowns.
Yeah.
He's already got 4
He
this
can
year.
sling it. He really can sling it.
Interesting stat to note, Brandon Wimbush, 467 passing yards on the year. Kyle Shermer just 440. So don't sleep on Brandon Wimbush to have a good game in the passing department, especially if this offensive line can protect him.
He does have 4 touchdowns. Wimbush has just 1, though, and no picks compared to Wimbush's 4 now.
Of course.
Well, tight end Jared Pinckney, by the way, is another big target for Vanderbilt. He has 130 receiving yards through 2 games. This was a game where if you asked me a month ago, am I concerned? No. I'm concerned about this game.
I think it'll be close. Again, I predicted it last week. It'll be close with Ball State. I think we may have not even closer than it was versus Ball State because, again, it was an 8-point game versus Ball State. But if you ask me, based on my prediction going into last week versus my prediction going into this week, I think it'll be probably a 10-point game, maybe close to 2 touchdowns. But it's going to be, I think, close. And I would not be at all surprised to see Vanderbilt and Notre Dame going down to the wire in the final moments of tomorrow's game.
Yeah, we'll get to predictions in a moment, but Vanderbilt, even though they are not in the top 25, and that's partly because they've played 2 no-name opponents, this is a team that I think is pretty good. They score a lot of points. They've outscored their opponents 76-17. So, and they have a solid defense too, by the way. Their defense has forced 6 turnovers in 2 games. So this might even be a better defense that's on Notre Dame's schedule.
And maybe it's the hopeless optimism that comes with being a lifelong Notre Dame fan, but I anticipate Notre Dame to come out much more aggressive and much more focused than they did last week. I think that the lapse in play last week was partially attributed to maybe a more conservative play calling set. Wimbush with only 3 design runs, the routes were very simple. I really do think that Ball State wasn't trying to show Notre Dame wasn't trying to show too much against Ball State, so that when they can come out against a team like Vanderbilt, very capable of doing some damage, Notre Dame has a lot up their sleeve that maybe Vanderbilt can't prepare for. So I'm ready to see Notre Dame come out and play much sharper, much more aggressive. I think the offense is going to be firing on all cylinders, and I think the defense is going to continue to be dominant.
By the way, Vanderbilt last week held Nevada scoreless in the second half. Second half scoring been an issue for Notre Dame. They haven't scored 1 point in the fourth quarter thus far this season.
It's been a problem. I don't know if that's just something that just so happens to be they haven't scored in the fourth quarter, or if it's something that late in games they're getting tired and they're not able to convert some of the plays they were earlier in the game. We're going to have to see how that progresses over the next few weeks. I don't anticipate that being a big problem going forward, but I think it's important for Notre Dame to get off to a strong start, score on that first drive the way they did versus Ball State. If they didn't score on that first drive versus Ball State, we may be talking about a very different Notre Dame team right now that could be 1-1. But Notre Dame did a nice job with the offense, setting the tone early on. Can they do the same thing versus Vanderbilt? That's going to be key. And if they can, they should be okay.
I'll counter your stat. Notre Dame hasn't scored in the fourth quarter. They also haven't trailed for a second all season. Notre Dame has been in control of both of the games that they've played so far, one against Michigan, one against Ball State, 2 very different opponents. The thing is, they've been in control from start to finish of both of those games. And so I think the reason they haven't scored in the fourth quarter is because they haven't had to. They have put the cruise control on. They've been able to rely on their defense. And the parallels between this team and that 2012 team that went undefeated, asterisk mark because of the NCAA penalty, that team had a questionable quarterback in Everett Golson who could make plays with his feet, but maybe wasn't the most dependable in the passing game.
Right.
And they had a defense that could shut down anybody. And so many times in games that probably shouldn't have been as close as they were, they relied on that defense, and the offense just got by. And so I see so many similarities between those two teams, and I really do think that it's a similar story this year, a defense that you can rely on no matter what, that will not break, no matter what's facing them, and a quarterback that is destined to struggle, but also destined to succeed.
A lot of people drew comparisons between the Purdue game in 2012 when Notre Dame came back after blowing out Navy across the drink in Ireland, and they had to kick a field goal in the last minute of the game to beat Purdue, who wasn't good that year. And then, of course, they go on undefeated to go to the national championship. So a lot of people were saying, well, maybe this Ball State game was sort of like that Purdue game.
And Kelly has historically struggled in his second game of the season, too. You think back to last year, the Georgia game was the second game of the year. He did struggle in that game. That's a much different opponent.
Right.
2012, Purdue, second game of the season. I think there's just something about all of the hype that leads up to a Notre Dame football season, and a lot of it's expended in the first game, and then the second game just seems to be some sort of wake-up call that, you know what, we got a lot of football left to be played.
Yeah. At no point last weekend was I ever concerned that Notre Dame was going to lose. I never thought they were going to lose.
I didn't think so either.
But the game was way too close.
They were up at half, and I thought, being up at half, I think it was up by about 10 points. And at that point, I thought, I think Notre Dame's going to chip away and continue to pile on and win this game by 14, 20 points maybe. But it never really happened. Ball State did a nice job staying in the game. I think Notre Dame's going to get off to a fast start. They did so both versus Michigan and versus Ball State on that first drive. Would not be at all surprised to see a touchdown drive led by Brandon Wimbush in that rushing game and get on the board early for the Irish.
They've scored on both of their first drives of the game in the first half, and they scored on their first drive of the second half against Ball State. That first drive, when the energy is right there, Notre Dame does a really good job of capitalizing.
Yeah.
They have to keep that momentum up, and they have to keep the focus.
By the way, Vanderbilt last week scored on 4 of its 6 possessions in the second half. So they've been able to sustain the offense past that first drive, whereas, as we've just been talking about, Notre Dame hasn't really had that ability thus far. So can they flip the script? I don't know. They're 13.5-point favorites. When Notre Dame is a double-digit favorite at home, they're 3-13 against the spread. So let that sink in. Take that for whatever it is. Let's get a prediction from you.
It isn't a big double-digit favorite, though.
Yeah.
So in the end, I think Notre Dame's going to take this game. I'm seeing it being somewhat close. I don't expect the offense to go off and crazy here. I think they're going to win this game 24-17 tomorrow. Not huge, but they put up enough offense to win the game again.
24-17 win over Michigan, 24-16 win over Ball State. You say 24-17. What say you?
The heart wants what the heart wants, Johnny. And there's nothing more that I want than to see Notre Dame come out and just explode for a huge offensive performance. The defense shuts down Vanderbilt, and this thing isn't close. The numbers just don't. That doesn't stack up. I think this game is a one-possession game at the most. I think it's maybe even a 3 or a 4-point game. I'm going to go with 24-21 Notre Dame wins. They don't trail, but I think that Notre Dame, it's close the whole way, but Notre Dame wins.
Vanderbilt, by the way, has never beaten a top 10 team on the road in their history. So there's something to be said for that. Thanks for watching the show, everyone. Enjoy the weekend here at Notre Dame.
It's Parents
and
Weekend.
go
Welcome to all
Irish.
the parents that are on campus.
See ya.